That oversized tin can is an eyesore, and it's being removed from my street, Mr. Callahan. The words dripping with a venomous entitlement that could curdle milk sliced through the crisp morning air. I stood on my own front porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched in disbelief as a greasy, hulking tow truck driver chained up the front axle of my 40-foot Class A motorhome. My retirement present to myself. The last big thing my wife Sarah and I had planned together before I lost her. Supervising the operation, with her arms crossed over a floral muumuu that seemed to be losing a battle against her sheer mass, was Karen. Her face, a mask of smug satisfaction, was framed by a helmet of blonde hair so lacquered it looked like it could deflect small arms fire. She was the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, a title she wielded with the subtlety of a tactical nuke. The RV wasn't just a vehicle. It was a $300,000 vessel of memories yet to be made, a rolling tribute to a life of service and a promise I'd made to my late wife. And this woman, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, was having it dragged away like a piece of common trash. I walked down my driveway, my bare feet cold on the concrete, and kept my voice level, a trick you learn after 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. Karen, I started, we've been over this. It's parked on my property, well within the setback lines. It's not violating any county ordinance. She scoffed, a sound like a deflating tire. Your property ends at the grass, Mr. Callahan. This street, this curb, this entire pristine aesthetic belongs to the Oakwood Preserve HOA. Your monster truck is in violation of Article 7, Section 4, prohibiting recreational vehicles being visible from the street for more than 24 hours. My property, my street. Her words rang with a possessive fury that was utterly disconnected from reality. The tow truck driver, a sullen man with a faded tattoo of a skull on his neck, grunted as he tightened a chain, the metal screeching in protest. He wouldn't even look at me. He was her man, bought and paid for. That's not accurate, I said, holding my ground. I'm not in your HOA. My property is adjacent to, but not part of, Oakwood Preserve. This street is a private access road, and my property line, according to the official county plat, extends to the center line of the asphalt. I might as well have been speaking ancient Sumerian. She waved a dismissive hand, a fleshy gesture of absolute power. Paperwork, schmepperwork. I am the president. I make the rules and I enforce them. You were warned. A single sheet of paper, a violation notice, had been slapped on my door 2 days ago. I'd intended to address it with a certified letter and a copy of my survey, but I had underestimated the velocity of her tyranny. The truck's engine roared to life, and with a sickening lurch, my RV, my future, was dragged off the custom-paved hardstand I had installed specifically for it, the rear tires scraping over the curb with a sound of tearing rubber and cracking fiberglass that sent a hot spike of rage through my chest. The damage was already done. She smiled, a thin, cruel line on her face. Have a nice day, Mr. Callahan. The fees at the impound lot are quite steep, I hear. Perhaps next time you'll choose to be a more considerate neighbor. With a final, triumphant sniff, she turned and waddled back toward her perfectly manicured lawn, leaving me standing there, humiliated, violated, and burning with a cold, clear fury I hadn't felt since my days in a much dustier, more dangerous part of the world. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She had declared war on the wrong soldier. If you've ever had a run-in with an HOA tyrant from hell like Karen, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. I want to hear your story, so drop a comment down below and tell me where you're watching from and what your own HOA nightmare was. You're not alone, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this one ends. Now back to the beginning of Karen's downfall. I had bought this specific lot for one reason: freedom. After 3 decades of following orders, of living in base housing, of being told where to be and when, I wanted a piece of land that was mine. Unrestricted, no covenants, no conditions, no petty dictators telling me what color I could paint my mailbox. This 5-acre plot on the edge of town was perfect. It was a corner lot, bordered on one side by a county road, and on the other by the newly developed Oakwood Preserve subdivision. The developer had gone bust mid-project, selling off the remaining unplatted parcels like mine on the cheap. I got it for a song. I had spent the first 6 months of my retirement building my small, efficient house with my own two hands, just as Sarah and I had designed. The RV was the final piece of the puzzle. We were supposed to see the Grand Canyon, visit the national parks, and drive the Pacific Coast Highway. After her fight with cancer, the doctors had given her a year, maybe two. We got 6 months. Her passing left a hole in my world so vast I was afraid it would swallow me whole. That RV was my promise to her. I was going to make those trips for both of us. And I was going to start right here, from the home we dreamed of. The problem was Oakwood Preserve Lane wasn't a county road. It was the only way to access the dozen or so homes in the subdivision, and my property happened to front it. Karen, who lived in the biggest house at the end of the cul-de-sac, had apparently crowned herself queen of this little fiefdom and assumed her dominion extended to my doorstep. As I watched the tow truck disappear around the corner, my beautiful motorhome swaying ignominiously behind it, the shock wore off and the training kicked in. The first rule of engagement, know your enemy, but first, know your terrain. I didn't storm over to her house. I didn't scream or yell. I simply turned, walked back inside my quiet, empty house, and went to my office. I unrolled the official survey document, the one I had commissioned before I even poured the foundation. The crisp paper felt heavy and real in my hands. The surveyor's seal, the precise black lines, the clear demarcation of my property, it was all there. Lot 17, Block 3, unrecorded parcel, adjacent to the recorded plat of Oakwood Preserve. And there it was, plain as day, a solid black line showing my property boundary running directly down the center of the 24-foot wide strip of asphalt designated as Oakwood Preserve Lane. Karen hadn't just towed my vehicle from a public street. She had hired a private company to enter my property and steal a $250,000 asset. This wasn't a simple rules violation. This was grand theft auto executed on her direct order. A cold smile touched my lips. She thought this was about an oversized RV. She had no idea what it was really about. This was about property rights, the rule of law, and a promise I made to my wife. And I was going to dismantle her little kingdom, piece by bureaucratic piece. The immediate priority was getting my RV back. I called the number on the tow company's sign, a local outfit called Gator Tough Towing, which sounded more like a monster truck rally than a legitimate business. The woman who answered had a voice like gravel in a blender. She confirmed they had my vehicle and informed me the release fee was a staggering $3,200. My jaw tightened. On what ground? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Standard tow is $450, she rasped. Storage is $200 a day, and there's a $2,000 administrative release fee from the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association, plus a $550 heavy vehicle surcharge. It was extortion, plain and simple. A kickback scheme dressed up in official-sounding language. Karen wasn't just a tyrant. She was a grifter. I'll be there in an hour, I said. I am paying this under protest, and I will be requiring a fully itemized receipt, including the legal authorization from the HOA that permitted you to enter my private property to remove my vehicle. There was a pause, then a click as she hung up. Perfect. They were already nervous. I grabbed my checkbook, my camera, and a folder containing a copy of my property survey. When I arrived at the dusty, sun-bleached lot, my RV was parked haphazardly in a corner, already looking forlorn. I saw the damage immediately, a long, deep scratch along the passenger side fiberglass where it had scraped the curb, and a cracked rear fender. I meticulously photographed every inch of the new damage from multiple angles. I photographed the tow yard, the sign, and the general state of disarray. Inside the greasy office, the woman from the phone, a peroxide blonde with a cigarette dangling from her lips, slid a greasy invoice across the counter. I examined it. The HOA admin fee was listed right there in black and white. I need a copy of the written order from the HOA, I said, placing my survey on the counter next to her invoice. This vehicle was removed from my private land. You were trespassing. She squinted at the survey, then at me, her bravado faltering. We just get a call from the HOA president. She signs the slip. We tow the car. That's how it works. Not this time, I said, my voice flat. This time it was theft. But for now, I'm going to pay this fee to mitigate my damages. I wrote the check, and in the memo line, I wrote, paid under protest, illegal tow from private property. I made her watch me write it. I then took a photo of the check before handing it over. She gave me the receipt and the keys without another word. The drive home was a silent, simmering rage. Every bump in the road felt like an insult. But as I pulled the RV back onto its paved spot on my land, the anger began to cool, replaced by a crystalline focus. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about ensuring this could never happen again, to me or to anyone else. The next morning, I was at the county records office at 8 a.m. sharp. The clerk, a kindly older woman named Martha, looked at me over her reading glasses as I explained what I needed. I want to see every document related to the Oakwood Preserve subdivision, I said. The original development plan, the articles of incorporation for the HOA, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the final recorded plat map, and, specifically, any and all deeds transferring ownership of common areas to the association. Martha nodded slowly. That's a lot of paper, honey. Having some trouble with the HOA? You could say that, I replied. For the next 3 days, I lived in that dusty basement archive. I smelled of old paper and microfilm. I painstakingly copied every single page. I traced the history of the development from a hopeful sketch on an engineer's drawing to the reality of the half-finished neighborhood it became. And on the third day, I found it. The smoking gun. It was buried in a file of miscellaneous correspondence between the defunct developer and the county planning department. The developer, in his haste to liquidate his assets before filing for bankruptcy, had legally formed the HOA and filed the CC and RS. However, he had never filed the final deed to transfer the common property, the green spaces, the little decorative entrance gate, and most crucially, the streets themselves, to the Homeowners Association. Legally, the HOA owned nothing but the ink on its letterhead. So who owned the streets? I cross-referenced the county's property statutes. In the absence of a formal dedication to a municipality or a proper deed transfer to a private entity like an HOA, the ownership of a private road defaults to the adjacent property owners, with each owner's title extending to the road centerline. I sat back in the creaky wooden chair, a slow grin spreading across my face. Karen didn't have authority over her street. She had no authority at all. She was a queen with no kingdom, a fraud ruling over a territory that didn't exist. She hadn't just towed my RV from my land. She had done it using the false authority of an organization that had zero legal claim to the very ground she stood on when she gave the order. The foundation of her entire reign was a lie, and I was about to pull the cornerstone out from under it. My first call was not to a lawyer, but to a man I knew would understand the strategic value of what I'd found. Dave Jensen was a retired Marine gunnery sergeant who lived 3 houses down from me, squarely inside the borders of Oakwood Preserve. He was a good man, meticulous about his yard and fiercely proud of the American flag he flew from a 20-foot pole in his front yard, a flagpole that Karen had been waging a relentless war against for over a year. I found him in his garage, polishing a set of golf clubs. "Gunny," I said, holding up the thick binder of documents I had compiled, "I need a minute of your time. It's about our mutual friend Karen." He sighed, setting a 9-iron down. "What's she on about now? The flagpole again? I swear that woman has more directives than a theater commander." "Worse," I said. "She had my RV towed yesterday morning, from my property." Dave's eyes narrowed. He'd seen the RV, knew what it meant to me. "She did what?" "That's grand theft, Jack." "That's what I thought," I replied. "But it gets better. I've spent the last 3 days at the county records office. Gunny, the HOA doesn't own the streets." I opened the binder on the hood of his pristine Ford F-150 and laid it all out. The unrecorded deed, the county statutes, the official plat map showing our property lines running to the center of the road. I walked him through it, step by step, my finger tracing the lines of legal failure by the developer. He was silent for a long time, his gaze flicking from the documents to my face and back again. The methodical, analytical part of his marine brain was processing the intelligence. Finally, he looked up, and a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. "You're telling me this whole time This entire HOA, it's a paper tiger? It's a ghost, I corrected. It has a name and a set of rules, but it has zero legal ownership of the common areas it claims to control. Every fine she's levied for parking on the street, every warning about basketball hoops, every violation notice for leaving your garbage cans out too long, it's all been a complete and utter bluff. Dave leaned against his truck, shaking his head in disbelief, which quickly morphed into righteous anger. She fined me $500 last spring because my daughter's friends parked on the street for her birthday party. She threatened to put a lien on my house. She can't lien a property for a violation of rules she has no authority to enforce. I explained. It's all intimidation. She's counting on the fact that nobody would ever bother to do the homework. Our small war council had its first 2 members. Dave knew everyone in the neighborhood. He knew who had been bullied by Karen, who had paid the ridiculous fines, and who was fed up but too afraid to fight back. Over the next week, we began a quiet campaign. We didn't call a big meeting. That would have tipped Karen off. Instead, we did it one-on-one. We started with the Millers, a young family 2 doors down from Dave. Karen had tried to force them to tear down a small, tasteful playset in their backyard because a corner of it was allegedly visible from the street. They were terrified of the legal threats and were about to comply. I sat with them at their kitchen table, my binder open, and showed them the truth. The relief on their faces was palpable, quickly followed by anger. She sent us 3 certified letters, Mrs. Miller said, her voice trembling. She told us we were ruining the visual harmony of the neighborhood. Next was Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow in her 80s who had been harassed relentlessly about the small collection of garden gnomes her late husband had set up around her rose bushes. Karen had deemed them tacky and a violation of the aesthetic code. Mrs. Gable was in tears when she told us how Karen would stand on the sidewalk and glare at her house for hours. Each story was a new log on the fire, a fine for a satellite dish, a warning for having a political sign in a window, a demand that someone repaint their front door because the shade of blue was unapproved. Karen had created a culture of fear, ruling her tiny kingdom through shame and the threat of expensive legal action. We collected copies of every violation notice, every threatening letter, every canceled check for an unjust fine. My binder grew thicker. It was no longer just about my RV. It was a dossier, a comprehensive record of a pattern of abuse and fraud stretching back years. Our coalition grew. The Millers, the Gables, and 3 other families were now in. We were a small but determined resistance cell operating deep within enemy territory. We all agreed on the plan. I would be the tip of the spear. My case was the clearest, the most flagrant violation. My property was undeniably outside her jurisdiction, and the theft of my RV was a crime. My fight would be the precedent that would break her power over everyone else. The stage was being set for a confrontation, but it wouldn't be a shouting match on the street. It would be a methodical, legally fortified siege. Karen had weaponized paperwork and bureaucracy to create her power. I was about to return the favor with interest. The first shot in our counteroffensive had to be visual, undeniable, and utterly disruptive to Karen's sense of order. Words on paper could be ignored, but a physical demarcation of the truth would be impossible to miss. On a bright Tuesday morning, a crew from a professional land surveying company arrived at my property. The 2 men, clad in high-visibility vests, began setting up their transits and tripods right in the middle of Oakwood Preserve Lane. It didn't take long for the curtains to start twitching in the houses across the street. Within 20 minutes, Karen's front door flew open and she marched out, her face a thundercloud of indignation. She planted herself on the edge of my lawn, her hands on her hips. "What is the meaning of this?" she boomed, addressing the surveyors but staring daggers at me as I observed from my porch. "You are obstructing a private roadway." The lead surveyor, a calm professional named Marcus, didn't even look up from his eyepiece. "Just doing my job, ma'am. We've been contracted by Mr. Callahan to mark his property line. His property line ends at the grass," she shrieked. I decided it was time to engage. I walked down to the edge of the street holding a fresh cup of coffee. "Actually, Karen," I said, taking a slow sip, "it doesn't. As I've tried to tell you, it extends to the center line of the road. These gentlemen are simply confirming the official, legally recorded boundary. Over the next hour, under Karen's sputtering, impotent rage, the surveyors worked with beautiful precision. They drove wooden stakes with bright pink plastic ribbons into the asphalt, one every 10 feet, creating a perfectly straight, dotted line that ran the entire 500-foot length of my property, bisecting the street exactly in half. The visual was glorious. It was a physical manifestation of the truth I had uncovered in the county archives. It screamed, "This half is mine." Cars driving down the street had to slow and carefully navigate around the stakes. It turned the neat, orderly road into an obstacle course. It was a flag planted firmly in conquered territory. Karen stood there the entire time, her face getting redder and redder, her phone pressed to her ear as she presumably called her cronies on the HOA board in her pet tow company. She was witnessing the foundations of her authority being staked out and proven false right before her eyes. Once the surveyors were finished and had packed up their equipment, I walked back into my house and drafted a letter. It was polite, professional, and utterly uncompromising. I addressed it to Karen personally, as president of the HOA, and to each of the other board members individually. I sent it via certified mail with a return receipt requested. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, the facts of the case. It referenced the official county plat records, copies of which I included. It detailed the illegal towing of my recreational vehicle from my private property. It informed them that the survey stakes now mark the legal boundary and that any member or agent of the HOA, including their landscaping contractors or tow companies, who crossed that line without my express written permission would be considered trespassing. I also included a preliminary invoice for the costs I had incurred, the fraudulent $3,200 tow and impound fee, the estimated $1,500 for the damage to the RV's fiberglass, and the $2,800 fee for the land survey. Total $7,500. I am a reasonable man, I wrote. I trust that now that the facts have been clearly established, you will wish to resolve this matter amicably. I knew, of course, that she would do no such thing. Amicable was not in her vocabulary. I wasn't trying to reason with her. I was building a paper trail. Every certified letter, every invoice, every documented fact was another brick in the legal wall I was constructing around her. She was used to people cowering. She was used to her authority being absolute. She had no idea how to handle someone who wasn't afraid of her, someone who had better, more accurate paperwork than she did. The stakes in the road were a line in the sand. I was daring her to cross it, and I knew with every fiber of my being that her arrogance and her rage would compel her to do just that. Her next move would be her next mistake, and my camera was ready and waiting. Karen's response came not in the form of a letter or a phone call, but under the cloak of darkness. My security system, a series of high-definition night vision cameras I'd installed around my property, sent an alert to my phone at 2:17 a.m. I didn't even have to get out of bed. I just tapped the notification and watched the live feed. There she was, a lumbering silhouette in a ridiculous pink tracksuit, moving down the street from one survey stake to the next. She'd glance around furtively, then bend over with a grunt, her whole body shaking with the effort, and yank a stake out of the asphalt. She'd then toss it with contempt onto my lawn. It was a pathetic, almost comical display of defiance. She was like a child throwing a tantrum, believing that if she could just remove the evidence of her error, the error itself would cease to exist. I watched her pull up every single one of the 50 stakes. It took her the better part of 20 minutes, and by the end, she was panting, leaning against a mailbox to catch her breath. I saved the entire video file to a secure cloud server and a separate hard drive. I now had high-definition video evidence of the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association willfully trespassing and destroying private property. The cost of the survey was $2,800. The stakes themselves were part of that professional service. This wasn't just vandalism, it was felony-level criminal damage given the cost. A sane person, upon receiving my certified letter with its mountain of evidence, would have consulted a lawyer. The lawyer would have told them they were in an indefensible position and should immediately seek a settlement. But Karen wasn't sane. She was an egomaniac. Her entire identity was wrapped up in her power as HOA president. To admit I was right would be to admit her entire reign was a fraud. So she doubled down. The next morning, I didn't call the police. That would have been premature. A report would be filed, and it would get lost in the system. I needed to let her escalate. I needed to give her more rope. Instead, I made another call. Marcus, Jack Callahan here. It seems we have a problem. The survey stakes I paid you to install last night have been removed. I could almost hear him sigh over the phone. Let me guess, the lady in the muumuu? The very same, I confirmed. So I need you to come back out. But this time, no stakes. I want something a little more permanent. I want you to paint the line. There was a pause. Paint it? On the asphalt? Jack, the county might have an issue with that. It's not a county road, I said quickly. It's a private drive with defaulted ownership. It's my property. I've got the documents to prove it. I want a 4-inch wide, traffic grade, permanent yellow line painted directly on the boundary you surveyed yesterday. Can you do that? I could hear him smile. Yeah, Jack, we can do that. 2 hours later, a different truck arrived. This one was equipped with a road striping machine. The crew, working off the original survey data, laid down a beautiful, thick, bright yellow line right down the middle of Oakwood Preserve Lane. It was glorious. It was a defiant, unmissable, semi-permanent declaration of ownership. It looked like the divider on a state highway. It screamed, "Do not cross." While the paint was still drying, I sat down at my desk again. It was time for the next phase of the operation. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for a lawyer Dave had recommended. He was a bulldog, a former JAG officer who specialized in real estate and property law. Mr. Albright, I said when he answered, my name is Jack Callahan. I have an HOA problem I think you'll find very interesting. It involves grand theft auto, criminal damage to property, and systemic fraud. And I have all the documentation to prove it. I spent an hour on the phone with Albright, laying out the entire situation, from the illegal tow to the video of Karen pulling up the stakes to the freshly painted yellow line. He was silent for most of it, only interjecting with sharp, precise questions. When I was finished, there was a long pause. Mr. Callahan, he said finally, his voice laced with what sounded like professional glee, this is the most beautiful case I've heard all year. This isn't just a dispute. This is a kill shot. What's your desired outcome? I want to be made whole for all my expenses, I said. I want a permanent, legally binding injunction preventing the HOA and Karen specifically from ever setting foot on my property or attempting to enforce their rules on me again. And most of all, I added, I want to dismantle the fraudulent authority she has used to terrorize her neighbors. Albright chuckled, a low, predatory sound. Oh, we can do more than that. We're going to make an example of her. Let me draft a new demand letter. This one will have teeth. She thought she was a queen. We're about to serve her with a formal notice of her abdication. The letter he drafted was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It was delivered not just to Karen, but to the personal home addresses of every single member of the HOA board. It laid out the irrefutable facts, cited the specific state statutes they had violated, and included a link to the video of Karen destroying the survey stakes. The new revised invoice now included the cost of the second survey visit, the road painting, and Albright's hefty retainer. The total was now north of $12,000. The letter gave them 30 days to pay in full, but it also contained a new, devastating clause. It formally notified the board that as of this date, their tacit permission to use the western half of Oakwood Preserve Lane, my half, was hereby revoked. The road was 24 feet wide. My half was 12 feet. The average car is about 6 feet wide. This meant that from now on, any two cars meeting alongside my property could not pass each other. It effectively turned a 2-lane road into a 1-lane bottleneck for a 500-foot stretch. Furthermore, any commercial vehicle contracted by the HOA, their landscapers, their trash collection service, their security patrol that crossed the yellow line would be considered trespassing and would be subject to a $500 access fee per vehicle, per occurrence, payable to me. I had taken her weapon, petty rules and fines, and turned it back on her, but my rules were based on actual legal ownership of the land. The trap was set. The legal framework was in place. All I had to do now was wait for the chaos to begin. The chaos began on Tuesday, which was trash day. I was up early, sitting on my porch with my coffee and a video camera on a tripod. Right on schedule, the massive waste management truck turned onto Oakwood Preserve Lane. The driver, a guy I'd waved to a dozen times, slowed as he approached my property, his eyes widening at the bright yellow line bisecting the street. He had a problem. To service the houses on the far side of the street, his truck's automated arm needed to extend over the center line. He couldn't do it without crossing onto my property. He stopped the truck, got out, and scratched his head. He looked at the line, then at my house, then back at the line. I gave him a polite wave. He hesitantly waved back. After a moment, he got on his radio. A few minutes later, his supervisor's pickup truck pulled up. They had a heated discussion, pointing at the line and gesturing. The supervisor eventually came and knocked on my door. Sir," he said, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "We've got a bit of an issue here. We can't pick up the trash for these 4 houses without our truck crossing that yellow line." "I'm aware," I said calmly. "That yellow line is my property line. My lawyer has informed the HOA that any of their contractors crossing that line will be charged a $500 access fee." The supervisor's jaw dropped. $500 to pick up the trash? "Per occurrence," I confirmed. "You can, of course, arrange to have the residents bring their bins to the end of the street, or you can have your driver get out and manually haul the bins to the truck. As long as your vehicle stays on their side of the line, there's no problem." He stared at me, then at the massive truck, then back at me. He knew his company's contract forbade drivers from leaving the cab for manual collection in a subdivision like this due to liability. He got back on his radio. The end result was that the trash for the 4 houses on the opposite side of the street, including Karen's, was not collected. The truck simply backed out and left their bins sitting there, full to the brim. By noon, the emails and texts started flying between the members of my little coalition. The HOA's online message board was apparently melting down. People were furious their trash hadn't been picked up. Karen, true to form, posted a blustering message blaming the unneighborly and illegal actions of the non-member on Lot 17 and assured everyone she was handling it. The next day, the HOA's landscaping crew arrived. They faced the same dilemma. Their large riding mowers couldn't maneuver on the common area strip across from my house without their back wheels crossing the yellow line. Their supervisor, having obviously been warned by the trash company, called Karen directly. I watched from my window as she marched out of her house and began screaming at the landscaping crew, ordering them to do their job. The crew chief, a hard-working guy named Hector, simply shook his head and showed her the yellow line. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough for me to hear, "that man says that's his property. My boss told me if my mower crosses that line, your HOA gets a $500 bill. We're not doing it. You want this grass cut? You got to use a push mower." Karen's face turned a shade of purple I had previously only seen in sunsets. She ended up having to get her own push mower out of her garage and angrily, sweatily mow the strip of grass herself, a task that clearly was beneath her. The one-lane road situation was even more effective. A school bus had to stop and wait for a resident's SUV to back up 100 feet to let it pass. An Amazon delivery van and a FedEx truck had a 5-minute standoff, with both drivers refusing to budge until a third resident intervened. The quiet, orderly street was now a source of daily frustration and delay, and every single resident knew exactly why. The yellow line was a constant, glaring reminder that something was fundamentally wrong with the way their community was being run. The anger which Karen had tried to direct at me was slowly but surely turning back towards her. She was the president. She was supposed to be in charge. Why couldn't she fix this? The tipping point came at the monthly HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse. This time, I wasn't the only outsider. I arrived with my lawyer, Mr. Albright, and our entire coalition. Dave the Marine, the Millers, Mrs. Gable, and half a dozen other homeowners who were now armed with the truth. We didn't sit in the back. We took the front row. The room was packed. The mood was tense. Karen, flanked by her 2 loyal, spineless board members, called the meeting to order. She immediately launched into a tirade against me, calling me a menace and a troublemaker who was trying to destroy their property values. When she paused for breath, Albright stood up. He was not a large man, but he had a presence that commanded the room. "Madam President, he began, his voice calm and clear. My name is Charles Albright. I am Mr. Callahan's legal counsel, and I'm here to inform you and the residents of this community that you are operating under a series of profound and legally perilous delusions. For the next 15 minutes, Albright systematically, surgically dismantled Karen's entire world. He projected the county plat map onto the screen at the front of the room. He showed them the deed history, highlighting the lack of any transfer of the common areas. He explained in simple, clear language that the HOA had no legal ownership of the streets they were trying to control. Then he played the video. He projected the night vision footage of Karen in her pink tracksuit, yanking the survey stakes out of the ground. The room went dead silent. You could hear people gasp. The sight of their president acting like a common vandal in the middle of the night was devastating. This, Albright said, pausing the video on a clear shot of Karen's face, is not the action of a community leader. This is a felony, criminal damage to property, and it is just one part of a pattern of harassment, intimidation, and fraud that Mr. Callahan has documented. He then laid out our demands: full repayment of all my costs, a public apology, and her immediate resignation. When he finished, the room erupted. It wasn't just my allies anymore. It was everyone. People were shouting questions from all corners. Is this true, Karen? Do we not own the streets? Did you really use our HOA funds to illegally tow his vehicle? I paid a fine for parking on the street. I want my money back. Karen stood there, her face white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had no answers. Her power, built on a foundation of lies and bluster, had crumbled to dust in the space of 15 minutes. She tried to bang her gavel, shouting for order, but no one was listening anymore. They were looking at the man in the front row, the quiet veteran she had tried to bully, and they were looking at the evidence on the screen. They finally knew who the real enemy was. Cornered, humiliated, and stripped of her authority in front of the entire community, a rational person would have resigned. They would have cut their losses and disappeared. But Karen was not a rational person. She was a creature of pure ego, and her ego had been dealt a mortal wound. In her mind, this wasn't a legal or procedural defeat. It was a personal betrayal by the very people she claimed to be protecting. Her final act was not one of contrition, but of pure, spiteful desperation. It was a move so stunningly stupid, so breathtakingly arrogant, that even my lawyer, Mr. Albright, was momentarily speechless when I called to tell him what was happening. 2 days after the disastrous HOA meeting, I was in my workshop, sanding a piece of maple for a new bookshelf, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy diesel engine and the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a vehicle in reverse. I walked to the front of the house and looked out the window. My blood ran cold. There in the street was another tow truck, a different company this time, bigger and even grubbier than the first, and the driver was hooking up my RV again. Standing on the sidewalk, directing the operation with a frantic, furious energy, was Karen. She was on the phone, screaming into it, pointing at my RV. She had done it. She had actually, unbelievably, crossed the final line. This time, I was prepared. My response was a cascade of pre-planned actions. First, I hit a speed dial number on my phone. Albright, I said, it's happening. She's towing the RV again, right now. I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. I've got the injunction paperwork ready to file. The judge is on standby, but you need to call the police. Now. My second call was to 911. My name is Jack Callahan, I said, my voice steady and clear. I am at 125 Oakwood Preserve Lane. A woman is attempting to steal my motor vehicle, a 2022 Tiffin Allegro, valued at over $300,000. The vehicle is located on my private property. I have all the documentation to prove ownership of both the vehicle and the land. I request immediate police assistance. My third call was to Dave, the Marine. Dave, it's go time. She's making her move. On my way, he said, and I'm bringing friends. The news, too. A buddy of mine at Channel 4 owes me a favor. I walked outside, my phone recording video. The tow truck driver, a massive man with a greasy ponytail, had the chains on and was starting to winch the RV forward. Stop, I shouted, my voice booming across the lawn. You are on private property and you are attempting to commit felony grand theft. I have already called the police." The driver hesitated, looking over at Karen. She screamed at him, "Don't listen to him. I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I am authorizing this tow. He's illegally parked." "There is no HOA authority here," I yelled back. "This is private land." Just then, two things happened at once. A police cruiser, lights flashing, screeched around the corner, and a white news van from Channel 4 pulled up right behind it. Moments later, Mr. Albright's sleek black sedan parked across the street, and he got out, carrying a leather briefcase. Dave and about a dozen other homeowners came out of their houses, all with their phones up, recording. The scene was set. The audience was assembled. The tow driver froze, seeing the police lights. A tall, professional-looking police officer stepped out of his cruiser and surveyed the scene. "What's going on here, Wai?" he asked, his hand resting on his hip. Karen immediately rushed toward him. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man," she said, pointing a trembling finger at me, "is illegally parking this monstrosity in our neighborhood, and he's refusing to move it." The officer looked at me. I simply held up my hand and said, "Officer, this woman has hired this company to steal my vehicle from my land. I am the legal owner of this property to the yellow line in the middle of the street. I have the deed, the survey, and my lawyer is right here." Albright stepped forward, calm and composed. "Officer, I'm Charles Albright, Mr. Callahan's attorney. Here is a copy of the county recorded plat map for this property. As you can see, Mr. Callahan's property line extends to the center line of the road. That RV is parked entirely on his land." He handed the officer the documents. The officer examined them, his expression growing more serious. He walked over to the yellow line, looked at the position of the RV, and then back at the plat map. He then turned to the tow truck driver. "Son, if you move that vehicle another inch, I'm going to arrest you for grand theft auto. Unhook it, now." The driver's face went pale. He immediately started unchaining my RV. Karen let out a shriek of rage. "What are you doing? I am the president. I have authority here. You work for me." The officer turned his attention to her. "Ma'am, you have no authority here. This is a private property dispute, and right now, you are inducing a private citizen to commit a felony. You are creating a public disturbance, and you are making false statements to law enforcement." Albright chose that moment to step forward again. "An officer," he said, handing him another document, "you should know that we have a temporary restraining order against Ms. Peterson, which was signed by a judge this morning, prohibiting her from contacting my client or setting foot on his property. She is in clear violation of that order right now." The officer read the restraining order. He looked at Karen, who was standing less than 20 feet from me on the edge of my property. He sighed. "Ma'am, you are in violation of a court order." Karen's mind finally snapped. "This is my neighborhood. I will not be terrorized by him," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am the law here." The officer had heard enough. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." Karen stared at him in stunned disbelief as he pulled out his handcuffs. The click of the cuffs snapping onto her wrists was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard. The news camera zoomed in on her face, a perfect portrait of shock and defeated arrogance. As the officer led her, sobbing and protesting, to the back of his cruiser, the neighborhood erupted in spontaneous applause. It wasn't just my victory, it was theirs. It was a victory for the Millers and their playset, for Mrs. Gable and her gnomes, for Dave and his flagpole. It was the end of a reign of terror. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. The Channel 4 news story aired that night, complete with footage of a hysterical Karen being placed in the back of a police car. The bright yellow line on the road a constant visual anchor for the story. The segment was titled "Cul-de-sac Queen Dethroned," and it went viral online overnight. It was picked up by national news aggregators and morning talk shows. Karen became an instant, infamous meme, the poster child for every HOA nightmare story ever told. Legally, she was finished. She was charged with violating a restraining order, attempting to procure a felony, and, after Albright presented the video evidence, felony criminal damage for destroying the survey stakes. The towing company she hired tried to bill the HOA for their time, but the board, now in full panic mode, refused to pay, stating Karen had acted without their authority. The company then tried to sue Karen personally. Her life became a vortex of legal fees and public humiliation. The HOA itself imploded. The other two board members resigned via email within 24 hours of Karen's arrest. An emergency meeting was called, not by the board, but by the homeowners themselves. Dave Jensen, the Marine gunny, was the natural choice to lead. He was elected interim president by a unanimous vote. The very first motion put forth by the new board was to settle the claim from me. They agreed to pay the full invoice, now swollen to over $15,000, with the addition of Albright's final fees, without contest. They issued a formal public letter of apology to me, which was posted on the community website and mailed to every resident. Their second act was even more significant. On Albright's advice, the new board, led by Dave, started the formal legal process to have the streets, including Oakwood Preserve Lane, dedicated to the county. It was a complex and expensive process, involving new surveys and legal filings. But the homeowners overwhelmingly voted to approve the special assessment to pay for it. They wanted to be free. They wanted public roads maintained by the county, with no ambiguity and no room for a future Karen to ever seize power again. They were dissolving the very foundation of the fraudulent kingdom. A month later, on a Saturday morning, a check for the full amount arrived by courier. I walked it to my bank, and the feeling of depositing it was not one of greed, but of closure. The money would cover the repairs to my RV, the legal bills, and the surveys, with a little left over. Justice had been served. But there was one final act left to perform. The yellow line in the middle of the street had served its purpose. It had been a symbol of defiance, a declaration of truth. But now, with the war won, it was a scar. The community was healing, and the physical division needed to be removed. I could have just left it there, a permanent reminder of my victory, but that wasn't the point. The point was to restore order, the right order. I rented a commercial-grade road grinder, the kind used by highway crews to remove old lane markings. The following Saturday, I fired it up. The machine roared to life, a powerful, snarling beast. Wearing safety glasses and heavy gloves, I lowered the grinding head to the asphalt and began to methodically erase the yellow line. The work was hard and loud, the air filled with the smell of hot asphalt and pulverized paint. But as I worked my way down the street, my neighbors started coming out of their houses. They brought me bottles of water. They brought me lawn chairs to sit in while I took a break. Dave brought a cooler of beer. The Miller's kids drew chalk pictures on the sidewalk. Mrs. Gable, smiling brighter than I'd ever seen her, brought out a plate of cookies. It turned into an impromptu block party. People I had never even spoken to came up to shake my hand, to thank me. They weren't just thanking me for getting my money back or for getting Karen arrested. They were thanking me for giving them their neighborhood back. By late afternoon, the last trace of the yellow line was gone. The street was whole again, a simple black ribbon of asphalt connecting homes. It no longer represented a battleground, but a community. That evening, as the sun set, we were all still out there. Someone had fired up a grill. Music was playing from a portable speaker. Kids were riding their bikes up and down the street freely without fear. My RV sat peacefully in its spot on my property, the new fiberglass on the side gleaming, ready for the adventures Sarah and I had dreamed of. I looked at the scene, at the laughing neighbors, at the restored street, and felt a profound sense of peace. I had fought for my property, for my rights, for a promise to my wife. But in the end, I had won something much more valuable. I had won a community, and as I leaned against my RV, a cold beer in my hand, watching the last light fade, I knew Sarah would have been proud. The war was over, and we had well and truly won.